I learned the hard way that when a powerful man goes quiet, someone else disappears. 24 hours before my boyfriend stopped answering his phone, I was standing under the amber lights of Rossi's Italian bistro, blending concealer over fingerprints shaped like a confession I wasn't ready to make. Foundation 3 shades too warm, layered thick along my left wrist, a long-sleeved black uniform pulled down to my knuckles even though it was 82 degrees inside, and the kitchen felt like a furnace. Friday nights were always loud. Wine glasses clinking, forks against porcelain, men in tailored suits laughing like the world belonged to them. But I had perfected the art of moving through noise without being seen. Smile. Pour. Nod. Don't flinch when your phone vibrates. Don't look at the screen. Not when his name lights it up for the 7th time in 10 minutes. I told myself what I always told myself. It's fine. It's not that bad. I just bruise easily. The lie tasted familiar. At 8:17 p.m., the front door opened and the room shifted. Conversations didn't stop, not exactly, but they softened, like someone had lowered the volume on the entire restaurant. Dominic Rossi stepped inside without hurrying, without scanning the room like he needed permission to be there. He was 6'2", maybe 6'3", dark hair brushed back from a face that looked carved instead of born. A charcoal suit fitted so precisely it made everyone else look borrowed. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. The hostess straightened. Marco, our manager, nearly tripped over himself getting to table 12. I'd heard the name before. Everyone had. He owned half the properties on the north side, and, rumors said, the other half owed him favors. I kept my eyes down and carried a tray of Cabernet to his table, reminding myself that powerful men were just men, that they ordered drinks and tipped well and left. That was all. I set the glasses down carefully. My hand trembled anyway. One of them slid too close to the edge. I reached for it at the same time the chair behind me shifted. The tray tilted. My balance went with it. A firm hand closed around my wrist before anything could fall. Careful, he said, low, controlled. Not angry, just certain. His fingers were warm. Steady. Nothing like the grip I'd gotten used to at home. My sleeve slipped back. An inch. That was all it took. His eyes dropped. Dark. Focused. He didn't ask right away. He studied the fading purple beneath the makeup like it was a language he understood. My pulse thudded against his thumb. I pulled my arm back too quickly. I'm fine, I said before he spoke, the words automatic, rehearsed. He leaned back in his chair, gaze never leaving my face. Who did that to you? It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The men at the table went quiet anyway. I forced a laugh that didn't belong to me. Door handle. I'm clumsy. He held my eyes for 3 full seconds. Long enough for my throat to tighten. Long enough for me to feel seen in a way that made my skin prickle. Doors, he said softly, almost to himself, can be dangerous. I stepped away before my hands could shake again, before I could say something I couldn't take back. In the kitchen, I pressed my palms against stainless steel and tried to breathe. It didn't matter. He would finish his meal. He would leave. And I would go home to a man who believed love meant ownership. I didn't know then that by the time the sun came up, one of those men would still be in my life, and the other wouldn't. By 9:30 the restaurant felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in to listen. I avoided table 12 for as long as I could, refilling water glasses in the far corner, polishing silverware that did not need polishing, pretending I did not feel his gaze tracking every time I crossed the floor. My phone vibrated again in my apron pocket. Once, twice, 3 times in a row. I did not need to look to know it was Eric. He never liked when I worked late. He said men stared. He said tips were not worth the attention. He said a lot of things that sounded like concern if you did not listen too closely. At 9:45, the front door opened hard enough to rattle the glass. I felt it before I saw him. My shoulders went rigid. My breath shortened. Eric did not dress for places like this. Faded jeans. Heavy boots. A gray hoodie despite the heat. He scanned the room until he found me, and that familiar tension settled behind my ribs. The kind that made my smile feel like it was cracking. He did not look at the hostess. He did not wait to be seated. He walked straight toward me. "Why are you not answering your phone?" he demanded, not loud enough to cause a scene, but sharp enough that the question cut. I kept my voice steady. "I am working." I tried to step past him. His hand closed around my wrist. Not violently, just firmly enough to remind me who he believed I belonged to. "You think I do not see the way men look at you," he said. "You like that." I shook my head quickly. Please. Let go. I did not have to look to know who was watching. I could feel it like heat against my back. Eric released me when he noticed the silence around us. When he followed my line of sight and saw the man at table 12 standing now instead of sitting. Dominic had not raised his voice. He had not moved fast. He simply stood there, one hand resting lightly on the back of his chair, eyes steady and unreadable. Eric squared his shoulders as if preparing for something I could not see. Is there a problem? Dominic asked. Calm, polite, controlled. It was the kind of tone that made you rethink your next sentence. Eric laughed, but it sounded forced. No problem. Just talking to my girlfriend. Dominic's gaze shifted to me. Not my wrist. Not my face. My eyes. Are you? He asked softly. The question was not directed at Eric. It was directed at me. My mouth went dry. For a second I could not speak. I felt every pair of eyes in the restaurant waiting. I am fine, I whispered. It was the same lie. Different audience. Dominic studied me for a long moment, then nodded once as if filing something away. Good, he said. I would hate for there to be a problem in my restaurant. It was subtle. That word. My. Eric's grip loosened immediately. He stepped back half an inch, enough to create space that had not existed before. We are leaving, Eric muttered to me. Now. She is working, Dominic replied before I could answer. And she seems capable of deciding when her shift ends. There was no threat in his voice. No raised volume. Just certainty. Eric hesitated, then leaned close. To my ear. We will talk about this at home, he said under his breath. The promise in it made my stomach twist. He turned and walked out, the door slamming behind him. The room exhaled. Conversations resumed. Glasses clinked again. Dominic did not sit right away. He looked at me once more, something unreadable passing through his expression. Then he reached into his jacket and placed a small card on the edge of table 12. If a door ever feels dangerous, he said quietly as I approached to clear empty plates, you do not have to open it. I glanced down. A phone number written in precise black ink. No name. Just numbers. I nodded without trusting my voice. He held my gaze one last second. Not claiming. Not demanding. Just certain. When he finally left, the air felt lighter and heavier at the same time. At 1:30 in the morning, I clocked out and stepped into the parking lot alone. The asphalt shimmered under sodium lights. My phone buzzed again. Eric, open the door. I stared at the message, my hand hovering over the screen. For the first time in a long time, I did not move right away. I did not go home right away. I sat in my car with the engine off, the dashboard clock glowing 1:47 a.m., rereading the message on my screen like it might change if I stared at it long enough. Open the door. 3 words. No punctuation. No apology for earlier. Just expectation. I could picture him outside my apartment building, pacing the cracked sidewalk, hands shoved into his hoodie pockets, jaw tight. He hated waiting. He hated not being in control even more. My fingers hovered over the steering wheel. For months, my routine had been automatic. Drive home. Park. Climb the stairs. Unlock the door before he had to knock twice. Apologize for whatever he decided I had done wrong. But tonight something felt different. Maybe it was the way Dominic had looked at me when he asked if I was fine. Not skeptical. Not accusing. Just waiting for the truth I could not say out loud. I started the car and pulled out of the lot slowly, headlights cutting across empty storefronts and dark windows. The drive to my apartment usually took 12 minutes. I stretched it to 20, circling 2 extra blocks, checking my mirrors. More than necessary. By the time I turned onto my street, the sidewalk was empty. No gray hoodie. No pacing shadow. My chest loosened and tightened at the same time. I parked and sat there another full minute before grabbing my bag and stepping out. The night air was cooler now, a faint breeze carrying the smell of rain that had not fallen yet. I climbed the stairs quietly, listening for raised voices behind my door. Silence. Inside, the apartment felt exactly the same. Same sagging couch. Same chipped coffee table. Same framed photo from last summer when I still believed intensity meant passion. My phone buzzed again. I flinched. Eric, where are you? I typed back before I could overthink it. At work. Just leaving. The lie felt smaller than usual. Seconds passed. Then another message. We need to talk. I stared at the words. We always needed to talk. I set my phone face down on the counter and walked to the bathroom. Under the harsh white light, the makeup looked heavier. I rolled my sleeve up slowly. The bruises had turned a dull yellow at the edges, fading but not gone. I traced them lightly with my fingertips. They did not hurt anymore. That was the worst part. You get used to it, I thought. Used to explaining. Used to minimizing. Used to surviving. My phone buzzed again. I did not pick it up this time. Instead, I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the card. Plain, thick paper. A single phone number written in precise ink. No logo. No name. Just numbers. I had memorized them already. I told myself I would never use it. That I did not need rescuing. That this was my life and I had chosen it. Another buzz. Then another. Then silence. 5 minutes passed. 10. I picked up my phone. 23 missed calls. Not all from him. 2 from an unknown number. My heart thudded once hard. I did not call back. I sat on the edge of my bed, the card balanced between my fingers, and listened to the quiet. It was different from other nights. Not tense. Not waiting for footsteps in the hallway. Just still. At 2:38 a.m., my phone lit up one last time. Eric, open the door. I swallowed. There was no knock. No pounding. Just that message glowing against the dark. I stood, walked to the front door, and pressed my eye to the peephole. The hallway was empty. The light flickered once and steadied. I did not unlock it. I did not move. I stayed there until the screen went black and the building settled into silence. Somewhere across the city, a powerful man had gone quiet. And I had the strangest feeling that the quiet was not for me to break. I did not sleep. I lay on top of the covers with the lights off and my phone in my hand, watching the screen the way you watch a storm from behind glass, waiting to see if it will hit your house or pass you by. It did neither. After the last message at 2:38, there was nothing. No calls. No knocks. No footsteps in the hallway. Just silence that stretched thin and strange until dawn bled gray through the blinds. By 7:15, my alarm went off even though I had never closed my eyes. I moved through my morning routine on instinct. Shower. Uniform. Light makeup. Long sleeves again, even though the bruise on my wrist had faded enough that I could have left it bare. Habit is harder to erase than fear. My phone remained quiet on the counter. No apology. No accusation. No demand to explain why I had not opened the door. I told myself he was trying to make a point, punishing me with distance. He had done that before. 12 hours of silence meant I would be grateful when he came back. But 12 turned into 16. 16 into 20. By the time I drove to work, I had checked my phone so many times the battery dipped below 30%. At the restaurant, the air felt different. Not tense. Just curious. Maria met me by the hostess stand, eyebrows raised. Is everything okay? She asked softly. You look like you have not slept. I forced a smile. Long night. She hesitated. Some guy came by this morning asking about you. My stomach dropped. What guy? Not the one from last night. Different. Tall. Dark suit. He did not give a name. Just asked what time you worked. My pulse slowed instead of racing. I knew before she finished the sentence. I nodded like that information did not change anything and tied my apron around my waist. At 11:30, the lunch crowd trickled in. At 11:45, the door opened and conversations dipped the same way they had the night before. Dominic Rossi stepped inside alone this time. No entourage. No visible security. Just him and that quiet authority that bent the room around it. He chose the same table. Marco nearly sprinted to greet him. I stood frozen for half a second before forcing my feet to move. When I reached his table, my hands were steady. That surprised me. Good afternoon, I said, keeping my voice even. He studied my face first, then my sleeves. Did you sleep? He asked. The question was unexpected. Not accusatory. Not invasive. Just observant. A little, I replied. It was not entirely true, but it was closer than usual. His gaze shifted to the door briefly, then back to me. Has anyone bothered you today? The words were careful. I swallowed. No, also true. 23 missed calls still sat on my phone. But there had been no new ones. No new messages. Just absence. Dominic nodded once, as if confirming something only he understood. That is good, he said. I set a glass of water in front of him, noticing for the first time that his hands were perfectly still. Not restless. Not impatient. Controlled. You asked me last night if there was a problem. I said quietly before I could stop myself. And you said there was not. His eyes held mine. There is not, he replied. Not anymore. He did not add the last part. He did not need to. A strange sensation moved through my chest. Not relief exactly. Not fear either. Something steadier. I glanced down at my wrist, then deliberately pushed my sleeve up an inch. The fading mark caught the afternoon light. His gaze followed the movement, then returned to my face. Doors, he said softly, almost thoughtful. Only stay closed if you choose not to open them. I did not know if he meant my apartment, my life, or him. But for the first time in a long time, my phone sitting silent in my apron pocket did not feel like a threat. It felt like proof that something had shifted. Somewhere in the city, someone who once believed he owned me had gone quiet. And the man across from me had not raised his voice once to make it happen. Silence can feel like freedom until you realize you do not know what it cost. By the third day without a single call, I stopped jumping every time my phone lit up. The screen stayed blank except for group messages from coworkers and a reminder about my nursing exam next month. Eric's name did not appear. Not once. At first I told myself he was waiting for me to apologize. Then I told myself he was trying to scare me. By the fourth morning, the fear had shifted into something else. Uncertainty. I stood in my apartment kitchen staring at the empty space where his spare key used to hang. I had taken it down the night before and slid it into my desk drawer. My hands did not shake when I did it. That surprised me more than anything. At work, the restaurant buzzed with its usual rhythm, espresso machines hissing, plates clattering, the smell of garlic and fresh bread filling the air. I moved through tables with a steadiness I had not felt in months. I did not check my phone every 10 minutes. I did not rehearse explanations in my head. I did not scan the door expecting him to storm through it. At 12:15, the door opened and Dominic walked in again. Not flashy, not dramatic, just inevitable. He wore a navy suit this time, crisp white shirt, no tie. He looked less like a businessman and more like a decision already made. He chose the same table without asking. When I approached, I did not pull my sleeve down. The bruise was nearly gone now, a faint shadow against pale skin. You look different, he said as I set down his water. I arched an eyebrow slightly. Different how? Lighter, he replied. Not smiling, just observing. I considered that. Maybe I slept, I said. A small lie. I had slept, but not deeply. Not without waking once to listen to the quiet. His gaze lingered on my wrist, then moved back to my eyes. Has he contacted you? The question was direct this time. No pretense. I shook my head. No, the word felt strange in my mouth. Final. He nodded once, as if confirming an internal checklist. Good. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been circling my mind for 2 days. Did you do something? His expression did not change. I protect what is threatened in my presence, he said calmly. That is all. It was not an admission, not a denial, just a statement of principle. I searched his face for guilt, for arrogance, for anything that resembled ownership. I found none of it. Only control. I did not ask you to, I said quietly. I know, he replied. You should never have to. The simplicity of that answer hit harder than any raised voice ever could. Around us, the restaurant carried on. A couple laughed at table 7. Maria argued softly with the bartender about an order. Life continued as if nothing had shifted. But something had. I felt it in the way my shoulders no longer curved inward. In the way I stood a little straighter when I walked away from his table. Later that evening, when my shift ended and I stepped into the parking lot, the air felt open instead of watchful. No messages waited for me. No shadow lingered near my car. I unlocked the door and paused, glancing up at the dark sky above the streetlights. For the first time in a long time, I realized I was not bracing for impact. I was simply breathing. The quiet had not broken me. It had freed me. And across the city, a man who never raised his voice had redrawn the lines of my life without ever touching me again. Freedom does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, like a door you forgot was locked finally clicking open. A week passed without a single word from Eric. No calls. No messages. No mutual friends asking questions. It was as if he had stepped out of my life and the space had sealed behind him. I waited for the backlash. For the late-night apology. For the accusation that I had ruined everything. None came. Instead, I woke each morning to the sound of my own alarm and nothing else. The first night I slept 8 full hours. I woke up disoriented, convinced I had missed something important. But the apartment was still. Peaceful. Mine. At the restaurant, I began wearing short sleeves again. The bruise had faded completely, leaving only pale skin where evidence used to live. Maria noticed immediately. You look happy, she said one afternoon while we rolled silverware together. I almost laughed. Happy felt too big of a word. But lighter. Fit. I was lighter. Dominic continued to come in 3 or 4 times a week. Always alone now. Always at the same table. He never lingered longer than necessary. He ate, spoke little, and left a tip that made Marco treat him like royalty. But he never treated me like something owned. That was the difference. One evening, as the dinner rush slowed and golden light filtered through the front windows, he asked, "Have you changed the lock?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes," I said. I had done it 2 days after the silence began. A small hardware store 2 blocks over. $78.20 with a screwdriver. He nodded, approval flickering briefly across his features. Good. I hesitated, then sat across from him for just a second longer than professional distance required. "You knew he would not come back?" I said quietly. It was not really a question. Dominic studied me with that same steady gaze that had undone me the first night. "Some men rely on intimidation," he said calmly. "When that no longer works, they disappear." I searched his face for more. For details. For confirmation. He offered none. Instead, he reached into his jacket and slid something across the table. Not a card this time. A small folded paper. "There is a clinic on West End Avenue," he said. "They are hiring part-time assistants while students finish their nursing degrees. The hours are stable. The environment is professional." I stared at the paper. My name was written at the top in neat handwriting. Below it, a contact number. "Why are you doing this?" I asked before I could stop myself. He did not look offended. He did not look possessive. He looked certain. "Because you should not have to survive on tips and fear," he replied. The simplicity of it pressed against my ribs. No grand speech. No demand in return. Just a door offered. "I can take care of myself," I said, softer now. "I know," he answered. "That is why I am offering, not deciding." That difference mattered more than I expected. Outside, a bus roared past, headlights streaking across the window. Inside, the restaurant hummed low and steady. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my apron pocket. Not because I was obligated. Not because I was afraid to refuse. But because for the first time, someone powerful had looked at me and seen potential instead of weakness. As he stood to leave, he paused beside the table. "You are not anyone's property," he said quietly. Not dramatic. Not possessive. Just factual. I watched him walk toward the door, shoulders straight, movements controlled. The room shifted slightly as he passed, but it did not intimidate me anymore. It steadied me. When I stepped outside after my shift that night, the air felt cool against my bare arms. No shadow waited near my car. No message demanded I open a door. I unlocked it on my own terms and slid into the driver's seat, breathing in the silence that now felt like space instead of threat. Somewhere along the way, the fear that had once defined my days had been replaced with something stronger. Not dependence. Not debt. Choice. And that was the first thing that had truly belonged to me in a long time. The clinic on West End Avenue smelled like antiseptic and fresh paint, like new beginnings that had not yet been tested. I stood outside the glass doors for a full minute before going in, reading my own name on the folded paper again as if it might vanish if I blinked. I had called the number 2 days earlier. A woman with a calm voice had scheduled an interview without asking too many questions. That alone felt like a gift. Inside, the waiting room was quiet, pale blue walls, neat rows of chairs, a receptionist who looked up and smiled instead of scanning me for flaws. I smoothed my blouse and reminded myself that I had earned this. I was not here because someone rescued me. I was here because I could do the work. The interview lasted 30 minutes. They asked about my nursing program, my clinical rotations, my long-term plans. No one asked about my personal life. No one asked why I needed more stable hours. When they offered me the position on the spot, 20 hours a week at $18 an hour, I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief. Stability. I walked out into the afternoon sun with an official start date and a schedule that did not require late nights. I did not call Dominic. I did not feel the need to. That night at the restaurant, I found him at the same table, hands folded loosely in front of him, watching the door as if he knew I would come straight to him. I set down his water and let the silence stretch a second longer than usual. "I start next Monday," I said. His gaze sharpened slightly. "Good. Just that. Not I told you so. Not you are welcome. Just good." I studied him carefully. "You did not need to intervene," I said quietly. I could have found something eventually. He nodded once. I know. Then why? I pressed. He leaned back in his chair, expression thoughtful rather than defensive. Because sometimes the difference between eventually and now is everything, he replied. There was no ownership in his tone. No expectation. Just truth delivered without decoration. I realized then that he had never once asked for gratitude. Never once hinted that I owed him anything. That mattered more than the job itself. Over the next week, my life began to rearrange itself in small, practical ways. I packed up the last of Eric's belongings and left the box with the building manager. I changed my phone number. I rearranged my living room, so the couch no longer faced the door like a guard post. Each action felt deliberate, like drawing new lines around myself. Dominic continued to visit, but something had shifted between us. The tension had softened into something steadier. One evening, as I handed him the check, he looked up and said, "You are standing differently." I blinked. What does that mean? You are not bracing, he answered simply. I realized he was right. My shoulders were relaxed. My hands no longer hovered protectively near my sleeves. You noticed that the first night too, I said. That I was bracing. Yes. And you decided it was unacceptable. His eyes held mine. I decided it was unnecessary. The distinction lingered between us. Unnecessary. As if fear had been a habit, not a destiny. As if survival was not the highest standard I should accept. When I stepped outside after closing that night, the air felt crisp, early fall settling in. I paused under the streetlight, looking up at the dark sky stretching wide above the city. For the first time in a long time, my future did not feel like something I had to defend against. It felt like something I could step toward. I unlocked my car without scanning. The shadows. I drove home without checking my mirrors every 30 seconds. And somewhere behind me, in a restaurant glowing warm against the sidewalk, a man who ruled his world with quiet certainty had chosen not to claim me, but to remind me that I could claim myself. The first morning at the clinic felt like stepping into a version of my life that had been waiting patiently for me to arrive. I stood behind a reception desk instead of balancing a tray, wearing soft blue scrubs instead of black and long sleeves. The fluorescent lights were bright but not harsh. The schedule was printed neatly on a clipboard. My name sat there in black ink beside 10 a.m. intake and 2 p.m. follow-up. Structured. Predictable. Safe. No one yelled. No one watched me like I owed them something. Patients came in with quiet anxieties and left with instructions, appointments, reassurance. I moved through tasks with the steady focus I used to have before fear took up space in my head. By the end of my shift, my feet ached, but my chest felt light. I checked my phone once during lunch out of habit. Still no messages. Still no unknown numbers. It had been nearly 3 weeks. Whatever Dominic had done, he had done it thoroughly and without spectacle. That night, I stopped by the restaurant after my clinic shift, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I had given notice at the bistro, 2 weeks left before I transitioned fully. Maria hugged me when she saw me. "You look like yourself again," she whispered. I did not realize how much that meant until I felt my throat tighten. Dominic arrived later than usual. When he saw me, there was a flicker of something softer in his eyes, something that did not look like control or calculation. "How was your first day?" he asked as I set down his glass of water. "Busy," I said, and this time the smile was real. "Good busy." He studied my face like he was confirming that for himself. "You chose well," he said. I tilted my head slightly. I corrected gently. He nodded once, accepting the distinction without offense. That was the difference between him and every other man who had tried to define me. He never mistook influence for ownership. As the evening slowed, I found myself lingering at his table longer than necessary, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. "Do you ever get tired?" I asked suddenly. "Of carrying everything?" He considered the question seriously. "Yes," he said. No hesitation. "But I do not confuse strength with silence." The answer stayed with me long after he left. Later, walking to my car under the cool glow of streetlights, I realized something had shifted again. The quiet no longer felt like the absence of threat. It felt like space for possibility. I had changed my locks. I had changed my number. I had changed my job. But more than that, I had changed the standard I accepted. Fear was not love. Control was not protection. And power did not have to be loud to be real. The next afternoon at the clinic, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Shoulders back. Chin level. No sleeves hiding anything. I looked like someone who understood her own worth. That evening, when Dominic walked into the restaurant one last time before my final shift ended, he did not sit immediately. He paused in front of me, close enough that I could see the faint scar along his jaw in the warm light. "You are different from the woman I met," he said quietly. "No," I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I am the same woman. I just stopped apologizing for existing." Something almost like a smile touched his mouth. "Good," he said again. Always that word. Simple. Certain. As he took his seat, I realized that whatever existed between us was not built on rescue or debt. It was built on recognition. He had seen the fear I tried to hide. And instead of claiming me, he removed what made me small. In the silence that followed, I understood something clearly for the first time. He did not rule my life. He simply refused to let someone else rule it for me. And that was a power I was finally learning to carry on my own. My last shift at the restaurant arrived quietly, without ceremony, like most endings that matter. I tied the black apron around my waist one final time and looked around the dining room that had once felt like a stage I performed survival on. The tables were set, candles flickering softly against polished wood, the familiar scent of garlic, and red wine hanging in the air. For months, I had walked these floors bracing for impact, measuring every step against someone else's temper. Tonight, I walked differently. Not because I was leaving, but because I was no longer afraid to stay. Maria hugged me twice before the dinner rush began. Marco shook my hand like I had been promoted instead of resigned. "You are going to be great," he said, and for the first time I believed him without needing reassurance. When the door opened at 7:30, I did not need to look to know he was there. The air shifted the way it always did, subtle but undeniable. Dominic stepped inside wearing a charcoal coat over his suit, the early winter air clinging to him for a second before the warmth swallowed it. He paused near the entrance, scanning the room, then his eyes found me. There was no possession in that look. No claim. Just recognition. He chose the same table he always had. I approached with steady hands and set down his water without waiting for instruction. "Last night here," I said softly. He nodded, as if he had known. "And first week at the clinic," he replied. Not a question. I smiled. "It feels right." He studied me in that quiet way of his, taking in details others would miss. "You are not looking over your shoulder anymore," he said. I realized he was right. I had stopped scanning the door months ago, but I had not noticed the exact moment it happened. "I do not have to," I answered. "No," he agreed. "You do not." The dinner rush flowed around us, servers weaving between tables, laughter rising and falling. At some point, I sat across from him instead of standing beside the table. Not as an employee, not as someone asking permission, just as myself. "I used to think strength meant enduring whatever someone gave you," I said quietly. "Now I think it means deciding what you will accept." He listened without interrupting. That was another thing about him. He never rushed silence. "Strength," he said after a moment, "is knowing you have options and choosing with clarity." The simplicity of his words settled into me. I had options now. A new job, a new routine, a life that did not revolve around someone else's approval. And yet, sitting across from him, I did not feel indebted. I felt equal. When the check came, he placed cash inside the folder and slid it toward me. More generous than necessary, as always. But this time, he did not stand immediately. "You will not need protection from me anymore," he said calmly. It was not a withdrawal. It was a statement of respect. I met his gaze without flinching. "I never needed protection," I replied. "I needed a reminder." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Then remember this," he said softly. "No one owns your fear. And no one owns your future." Outside, snow had begun to fall lightly, thin white flakes catching in the glow of streetlights. When I stepped out after closing, the world looked freshly outlined, edges softened by winter. He stood near the curb, hands in his coat pockets, watching the snow settle. I joined him without speaking. For a moment, we simply stood there, two people who had crossed paths at the exact moment it mattered. "You ruled the silence," I said quietly, surprising myself. He glanced at me. "No," he replied. "You did." I watched my breath rise into the cold night air and realized he was right. He had not taken control of my life. He had removed the noise that made me doubt it. The rest had been my choice. As snow gathered on the sidewalk and the city moved on around us, I understood something clearly. He could command rooms. He could influence outcomes. But the only thing that had truly changed my world was the moment I decided I deserved better. And that decision had been mine.